Okay. Son of a gun. All right. Well, I don't know if any of that worked. I guess, you know what? If nothing else, I can always keep it up on the YouTube channel afterwards. So, my internet connection's not very good. Just the other day, we called Virgin and told them that we were changing our internet service provider. Can you guess why? So hopefully next month, this should all cease to be a problem. But for now, unfortunately, I have an internet connection that's somewhat unreliable. But James, I hear you say, you work online. Yes, I do. It's awkward. So does my wife. Anyway, regardless, we're back now. So let's hope it stays that way. If not, I may just have to record the video and upload it to YouTube, and then people can watch it at their leisure. I just thought it'd be fun to, see people in person and hang out. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway. Okay. So I was in the middle of sorting out the qualities of the different deities of the pantheon, and I got kind of an interesting one for Monster Slayer. So I'm going to add that note that says that, like, philosophers and kind of the theologians. I like the idea of philosophers. Gives me kind of an ancient Greek feeling there. They tend to think of Monster Slayer as being a symbolic representation of, hey, I'm glad that I have made it through to somebody. Yes, I had some trouble with my connection, and I hope that people who were watching earlier are able to find their way back to this stream. I'm not sure how to connect the two, or indeed if that's even possible, because I know nothing about streaming. Yay. I'm doing pretty good for someone who knows nothing, but that's not good in an absolute sense. Welcome. I hope you enjoy the stream. I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if you heard this, but there seems to be a good amount of latency on the stream. So if you make a comment and then I respond to it several minutes later, that's because I only just saw it. I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be difficult. Okay. So I like the idea that there's this group within society that are like, oh yes, Monster Slayer symbolizes the struggle between good and evil within every human soul. And then everybody else is like, no, Monster Slayer's a cool guy with a magic sword who fights monsters. So I wonder if there's a kind of head versus heart question in this society. Do we have a distinction between people who have a more academic sense of religion and the gods and people who have a more kind of narrative mythological sense? All right, now I put Celestial Sovereign on this list. I'm going to leave Celestial Sovereign to no. Let's go ahead and roll. See what Celestial Sovereign is like in this pantheon. Just flipping through my notes here. So we get to Celestial Sovereign. Okay. So I rolled a 5. And this is an interesting one. This says that, yay, hey, Rick, sorry about that. I don't know anything about any of this. So, but I'm glad that you're here anyway. So I rolled a 5, and 5 for Celestial Sovereign says that Celestial Sovereign was bound by younger deities in a primordial age. So this is a god who is essentially imprisoned by their own pantheon. Maybe once they were all powerful, but now they kind of have like a largely symbolic or formal role. And I think we should pick some of these other deities to have done it. So here I'm seeing Celestial Sovereign as someone a bit like Cronus or something like that, where once had this great authority, and then other deities decided, no, I'm gonna, I'm gonna take over the throne of heaven. This is going to be interesting when we come to part of constructing the pantheon, which is bestowing the crown. Okay. Next up on the list is the bestower of plenty, and this is your kind of like god of prosperity, maybe of trade, maybe of farming. I roll and I get a 3, and this is interesting. This bestower of plenty can be characterized in a number of different ways. This is a greedy god running a racket. So the bestower of plenty is a god who loves wealth, and specifically like worshippers of this god, they kick a piece of the action upstairs. So this is a religion, or this cult of this god anyway, is explicitly a kind of pyramid scheme. Or like a prosperity theology kind of a setup, right? Like you give, and this is not like that uncommon a principle. We're talking about the idea of do ut des, I give that I may receive, which is a feature of a number of ancient religions. Okay, then we've got Firebringer, our rebel god. So let's see what Firebringer's been up to. I'll go ahead and roll with it. So Firebringer is kind of the teacher of arts and sciences, the source of inspiration. If you look at the writing about like angels in ancient or medieval thought, or if you look at like Prometheus would be another example, sort of like a teacher of arts and sciences, probably tells people about cosmetics, a lot of stuff about how angels taught humans how to use cosmetics. Let's go and roll for Firebringer. So I got a 3, which says he was punished by, or they, we haven't given them personalities yet, punished by the gods for siding with mortals. So I feel like we're seeing a lot of conflict within this pantheon and between this pantheon and humanity, right? So I'm gonna just make a note of that as a theme. So we've got this idea of, and this actually makes head versus heart quite interesting, because one of the features of like discussions of religion in Plato is this question about how can you worship these gods that are awful, right? We've so Flaplow comments, our gods are a pretty quarrelsome bunch, aren't they? They really are. And so Plato talks about this in the Republic. He says, how can we be teaching people that the supreme god is this horrible being, is a, like, even leaving aside that modern thinking would understand Zeus as like a serial rapist, like he's bad in 100 other ways too. How can you tell people this is an example of virtue? And so this is where we get maybe that head versus heart divide, right? So that we have these philosopher types who are saying, well, obviously the supreme deity can't be this, the gods can't be like this. They must be, paragons of behavior. Therefore, clearly all these stories about murders and intrigues are just stories, right? Monster Slayer represents a, the struggle between good and evil. The overthrow of the celestial sovereign represents the, reason binding the emotions, or something like that. So maybe we have this group of like philosopher priests who regard their own mythology as symbolic, perhaps incorrectly. Okay, next up we got force of nature. Now I'm expecting less palace intrigue with force of nature, because force of nature is your storm god, sea god, whatever. In my mind, I visualize this as a maritime setting, maybe just because my kind of default old school D&D setting is a maritime one, kind of a pseudo Venetian sort of a. So let's have a roll for force of nature. Okay, I got a 2, an ageless, inhuman consciousness that thinks at the pace of nature. That's quite interesting. This sounds like force of nature is some kind of primordial nature spirit rather than the more human-like characterized deities of the rest of the pantheon. Interesting. I wonder if he is from that like earlier primordial era. I mean, kind of a good one. Okay, so force of nature is ageless and inhuman. And then finally we have the keeper of mysteries. So keeper of mysteries, like your magic, like secret society initiation gods. So like if it's a Greek example, keeper of mysteries might be someone like Hecate. In Norse myth, it'd be someone more like Odin. Let's take a look. Actually, I wonder, we might get some more we might get some more kind of subversive stuff here. Let's have a look. Keeper of mysteries. Okay. Oh no, that is interesting. I got a 4, a forgotten deity looked down on by the priestly hierarchies. So I think the picture that's emerging is pretty clear. We've got a we've got the keeper of mysteries. Like, again, keeper of mysteries is a deity who's associated with sort of like with magic and with curses and all that kind of thing. And then apparently our kind of like philosopher priests, they're like, oh, that's superstition. So it sounds like we have a divide between like up top we've got like kind of ethical philosopher priests, caption size, and then we've got mythological folk religion, and then I guess I guess there's a distinction between them, right? So it almost seems like we've got this kind of a hierarchical religious structure where your religious specialists tend to be the head types, right? So that we have, I said we had a dichotomy of the head versus the heart. So maybe we have that with the distinction between like a more intellectualized urban version of the religion and a more kind of traditionalist mythological one. So these guys are into philosophy, and these guys are into mythology, which also sounds interesting in that we, like, one thing that you have to decide when you're creating a pantheon is to what extent are there distinctions between what people believe about these gods and what's actually true about them. Is one of these is one of these groups right, or are they both just are they both just looking at the same thing from different angles? Okay, so I've got my 7 core deities. And I like that, I feel like this is a pretty good spread. We've got a group of kind of maybe more civilized deities, right? Represented by people like the Hierarch of Hell and the Bestower of Plenty. And we've got some more kind of like primeval ones as represented by the Force of Nature and maybe even the Keeper of Mysteries. Monster Slayer, we specifically know that there's a divide about how Monster Slayer is interpreted. So Monster Slayer seems like a good paladin patron. Next, we're going to go and we're going to double one of these. So most like real world pantheons are hard to, it's hard to say like, oh, this guy's the war god, right? If you look at Old Norse religion, everybody's like, oh yeah, Tyr is the war god. But the god of generals, the god who's invoked in terms of strategy is typically Odin. Is Ares the war god or is Athena the war god? Because these are, this thing is not designed by some bureau that goes, oh well, we've satisfied the requirement for a war god, let's have another one. They've just got the gods they've got. So we're going to have a second one of something on here, and I'm kind of tempted to have 2 celestial sovereigns, but I'm seeing like celestial sovereign and whoever's the actual crown of the pantheon, who we haven't picked yet. I'm thinking that we might have kind of like a caliph and sultan set up there, or emperor and shogun, right, where you have a ceremonial ruler and an actual ruler. So we might put the crown on someone who's not the celestial sovereign. We might have 2 forces of nature. We might have a sea god and a sky god, or a sea god and an earth god. That makes sense. We might have 2 keepers of mysteries. I think I'm going to go with 2 forces of nature. So I'm going to create a second force of nature. One of the rules in the procedure is double it, right? You want something that there's 2 of, and you want one god that has another aspect as well. So, think about how like, Hephaestus is a fire god and a technology god, or Thor is a monster slayer and a nature god, right? And this, I swear, I'm not going to go on a sighting to nowhere about Dumezil's tripartite hypothesis. But one of the nice things about anthropology is it doesn't have to be right in order to be good inspiration for gaming, right? So I mean, I'm not enough of a historian of religion to know how people think about Dumezil's tripartite hypothesis, but it's this idea that deities have these kind of like 3 functions, right? They serve to explain the natural world, they are about the supernatural world, or they're about the social world. And I'm super oversimplifying that, but like if you think about, I don't know, Odin, he has a social aspect where he represents the social order. He's a god of kings, he's a god of rulers, but he also has a supernatural aspect. He's a magician or whatever, right? So there's these different functions. And really popular gods have more than one, right? So think about Thor, who's a nature god. He's also a social god. He's the god of the common man. And he's also a supernatural god. He's the fighter of monsters. So first, let's roll another force of nature. So I'm going to go to the divine archetypes list. I'm going to look up number 6, force of nature, and I'm going to roll on his table. And if I get the same result, again, I'll just re-roll. Oh, okay. So this force of nature is a trapped monster or demon elevated to divine status. Yeah. So I'm just going to quickly create this little guy here, and I'm going to give him quality. So he is actually like, he was a demon and now he's a god, or he was a monster and now he's a god, which sort of makes sense for force of nature. Maybe he's a like a frost god, and he's really like a frost giant or something like that. We'll figure this all out as we go along, right? We're just sketching in the outlines at this point. And then I'm going to give somebody else a second attribute, and I don't have anything picked. I think I'm going to give a second attribute to either Firebringer or Hierarch of Hell. Right now, I don't feel like I have a clear idea of where either of them function in the Pantheon, so I'm just going to roll a d16, so a d6 and a d8, and see what I come up with to give them. So I got, that's a 4. Number 4 is... now that is interesting. So I'm going to put this on Firebringer. Firebringer is going to have the second attribute, Divine Physician. So he's the god of medicine. That's good because it's such a common role for player character clerics, right? Like the cleric is the party healer, and so therefore, when you put a god in the divine physician role, that means you're probably going to see some of it in your game, because it's very likely that you'll have characters who are part of that faith. Okay, so we've got a Firebringer who's also a divine physician, and we're going to roll a complication for that divine physician thing, and that is a 1. Okay. So this divine physician is also the plague god. So this is the god of both healing and sickness, and both is like worshipped in order to for healing, but like to some extent there's a sense that this god like caused those illnesses, right? So now we've got a pretty good spread of potential deities. I've got a death god, a monster fighter, a celestial sovereign. I've got 2 nature gods, a god of wealth, god of medicine, and kind of like say that this sort of obviously suggests to me that head-heart distinction again, right? Like, what if we looked at Keeper of Mysteries and said, okay, Keeper of Mysteries is the knowledge god in the folk religion, but Firebringer is the knowledge god in the academic religion, right? That is, a doctor, a scientist. And then Keeper of Mysteries is a teacher of supernatural wisdom, which would also explain like the weird thing about like in D&D where it's like, oh yeah, arcane magic has a divine patron for whatever reason. Okay, so I feel like we've got a head-heart split, which is nice, and we've got a lot of like rivalries amongst the gods. So we know that Celestial Sovereign was overthrown by younger deities, and it looks like we've got a group of elder deities. So let's mark the elders with, how about red for the elders? Because it looks to me like the Keeper of Mysteries. Does that do anything? I don't know. Both forces of nature and the Celestial Sovereign are elder deities. And I'll maybe do a question mark on Hierarch of Hell, because I like the idea that Hierarch of Hell was at one point a more prominent deity who died, right? Like that's how you wind up being the king of the underworld, is you die. Maybe. And that gives us about a half and half split, right? Well, actually not. It's a little minority of rulers, right? So, and we have Bestower of Plenty, who we know is kind of running a racket. We have Firebringer, who's a bit shady, right? The scientist, the technologist, the healer, but also the creator of diseases. And then we have Monster Slayer, about whom we don't know very much, except that there are a lot of people that regard him as, or them as, symbolic. So I wonder if that maybe isn't our like second generation of deities. Yeah, I like that concept. this is sort of the system working, by the way, where there's no like there's no real there's no real reason to I forgot what I was saying. Okay. Sorry, I tried to do two things at once, and as a result, I didn't do either of them. Okay, so let's say, so I'll tell you what, we now kind of know that our these young deities, who might all be maybe siblings, they overthrew the celestial sovereign. Yeah, I like that idea. Or it didn't overthrow the celestial sovereign, because the celestial sovereign still rules, but only in kind of like a symbolic way. And you know what? To make the forces of nature distinct, let's say that they granted divinity to the second force of nature for becoming their ally. Right? So force of nature was force of nature 2 was a demon, but they, you know, when they staged their coup and overthrew the celestial sovereign, they needed an ally. Again, like Zeus and the Hecatoncheires. They, you know, and the Cyclopes, like Zeus and monsters generally, you know, they got this monstrous ally to stage a coup and like reduced the celestial sovereign to a symbolic role. Okay, so we got young gods v old gods, but the old gods are these like rumbustious, you know, head kicking whatevers, and the young gods are the civilized bunch, right? So so they banished Hierarch of Hell to the underworld. They imprisoned Celestial Sovereign in a gilded cage. No one really knows what's up with Keeper of Mysteries. And Force of Nature, they're just like, okay, sea god, whatever. You know, go be the sea. Yeah, all right. A coup in heaven. Excellent. So we have a central myth. And whether you want to say that the central myth reflects the elevation of the ethical trend, the like philosophical trend in this culture's religion over the primitive one, or whether the elevation of the ethical philosophers over the folk priests happened because this coup actually happened in heaven. I mean, take your pick. I don't care to like, you know, worry too much about that kind of stuff. So we will say, we'll say it in smaller letters though, won't we? A coup in heaven. All right, cool. So we have a central myth, and we have two like loosely allied groups of deities, presumably with two loosely allied groups of clerics and paladins. And that'd be particularly nice because imagine that you are the like. I wonder if Monster Slayer's a goody two shoes, right? So you are a cleric of Celestial Sovereign, and you're like, damn, these young upstarts. I hate their, you know, worship of these gods that overthrew our traditional and beloved hierarchies. And then there's the paladin of Monster Slayer in your party, and you know, it's just like a keener, right? It's just that young person with a long sword and like a lot of brio, and you're just like, ugh, I hate everything your religion stands for, but as it happens, you know, you slay monsters like nobody's business, and you're just kind of nice and well-meaning. Okay, that's great. All right. Well, let's get back to the steps. So we're now going to we're going to bestow the crown. So we're going to put the crown on one of the pantheon, and I think it has to be Firebringer. Right? I think Firebringer is the ruler of the gods. I think it was once Celestial Sovereign, and now it's Firebringer. Okay. Naming gods is hard. It's maybe the hardest thing. You know, most cultures just have at least one god whose name just means God. Or the Lord. I fret too much about linguistics in games, and I have a hard time coming up with deity names, but I'm going to provide some tables just to say the heck with it, right? Okay. And on a kind of as above, so below principle, I think we can assume that this is sort of how the society that these gods are worshipping works too. That there's kind of a there's a lot of inequality in this society. Okay, so now we've got our divine archetypes together. We're going to pop through and we're going to take a look at some of the other divine attributes that we want to bestow. I don't think we want to give too many. I've already given the crown of heaven. I think we're just going to do another 2 or 3. Let's see what we got. So 3, we're going to give one of the deities the title of Ancestor of the People. I wonder who that should be. The obvious candidates, I think, are that we could give the job either to Hierarch of Hell or Force of Nature, right? So maybe Bestower of Plenty comes off as kind of a young punk in this structure. So I don't know if we necessarily want to make Bestower the Ancestor of the People. I don't know. Well, what do you think? Let me know in the chat who should be the Ancestor of the People. And if no one has a good idea, I do have a D8 here. So I've got, I'll make a note of this. I've got Ancestor of the People. I've also got okay, so we want Celestial Sovereign as the Ancestor of the People. Okay, good call, AB. Let's do it. So Celestial Sovereign is going to become Ancestor of the People, which again kind of sticks with that idea of like an elder being betrayed. I've got 2 more, Good Fortune and Scourge of Heaven, who is the kind of responsible for punishing sinners. I'm going to give the Scourge of Heaven job to, I think, probably Force of Nature too. That seems like a pretty good, a pretty good pairing. And I also rolled the one who gives Good Fortune, and I feel like that should it seems like it should be Bestower of Plenty or maybe Firebringer. But the Firebringer's already got kind of a lot of attributes. You don't always want to overcomplicate them. So let's give it to Bestower of Plenty. That makes sense, right? People like no, you know what? I actually don't want to do it because it's so obviously what Bestower of Plenty already does. Let's give Good Fortune to Keeper of Mysteries. Okay, we'll say that the cult of Keeper of Mysteries, which mostly died out, but it still survives in all these folk beliefs about praying to Keeper of Mysteries for good luck. So this is kind of our hidden god. All right. So we now have a pantheon that is complicated enough that you can dig into it, and simple enough that you could start playing a cleric of those deities right away, right? Who's my god? Your god's the Monster Slayer. What do? They keep society safe from supernatural forces that threaten it. Dope. I've got a long sword and a big shield. And then as the campaign goes on, you meet some priest who tells you, well, Monster Slayer really represents the conflict between good and evil that exists in all of us. And you're like, oh, I thought it represented whacking Balrogs with a longsword. Silly me. Excuse me, Balors. Okay. We're going to do some minor gods. I'm not going to bother too much of these. I'm just going to roll some dice and see what kind of minor gods we get. You don't have to have these. I think you could perfectly happily play this pantheon without having the minor gods. Well, let's roll for them anyhow. Okay, I got a 2, a 3, and a 10. Okay, so I got a god of cats, I got a god of bees, and I got a god of fisher folk. Okay. I do like the idea of having a god of cats. I think, I think those all work. But I don't quite know what they're gonna do at this point, except maybe have like the fishing god be sort of the like the human relatable face on Force of Nature 1, right? Well, so let's say Force of Nature 1's a sea god. I think we've gone ahead and established that. The temptation is to make Force of Nature 2 the fire god. I'm a little reluctant to it just because like fire god demon, whatever. But maybe. I'll come back to it. Okay. And then we're going to start talking about the characteristics of the religion. Now, if I roll something on this table that I don't like, I'm not going to bother with it because I feel like just generating the deities has given us a pretty clear idea of how this religion is organized. But let's give it a go. Oh, okay. So it has a hierarchy. So it says here there's a recognized hierarchy that places some shrines over others in importance. They don't have any authority over others, but everybody understands that they're more important. So we have a loose hierarchy of prestige, if not authority. So everybody understands that the big shrines in the big cities, presumably the ones now devoted to the new gods, are the most important. Certain rituals have to happen there, pilgrimages have to happen there, and now they've been taken over by this divine conspiracy. Okay, I like that. So in fact, I'm going to jump over and start a new page about the faith. And we're going to say, its structure is loose hierarchy of shrines, religious, not administrative. So the fact that I'm a priest from a more important shrine and you're a priest from a less important shrine doesn't mean I can tell you what to do, but it does mean that I probably have more money and I may have more kind of spiritual power. Okay. Fair enough, I think. I wish I could have got a graveyards. I like having got a graveyards. It's nice. Then we're gonna. I'm still working on the list of festivals, but I am gonna take a look and see what shrines or temples actually look like. Okay. Oh no, this is really interesting. Okay, I rolled a 4. So a 4 says. That the temples are whoa. Now I want to do that. I just want to expand. Okay, so I can't make it fatter. Sorry, I'm also brand new to using Jamboard. Temples are stone buildings carved to resemble wild places, right? So the temple, itself is like a big stone cathedral, but the art. The way that the temple is decorated and designed is meant to make it look like a grove of trees or whatever, which really fits with our idea of the two-tiered religion, right? So once upon a time, we had this kind of like folk religion that met in oak groves and what have you, and now we have a fancy religion that has big stone temples that they've carved to look like oak groves. Bit on the nose, maybe, but, good enough for D&D. Okay, and let's come up with, so I'll do some rites and rituals. And in fact, I'm going to say, I'm going to roll a couple of these because I think we've established that there's a, split within the religion, right? So we can't assume that all the religious rituals are similar. So I've rolled a form of worship as acts of community service done in the god's name. Sacred feasts open only to initiates, and ecstatic worship that opens the mind to divine communion. All right, so these are our three rituals. Cool. Again, this doesn't have to like come up all the time, but it's just a cool like. One thing I often do in games is have some kind of religious ritual or festival happening when the PCs arrive in town. I ran a Dogs in the Vineyard game, and the first town they came to, they arrived during a wedding. The second town they came to, they arrived during a funeral, and the third town they came to, they arrived during a hanging. And it's just like, again, it's a bit on the nose, but it starts you in the middle of the action, which is always desirable. And it's nice to sort of have, like, I've got all these festivals I'm not quite done with yet, but they should give us the kind of like everyday activities of these people. Okay. So I think we've got a picture of this religion, right? Now we're gonna now you can go in and kind of just like dress up these deities a little bit. So my next step is going to be characterizing them. I think that I feel like Hierarch of Hell and Celestial Sovereign, they feel like siblings. I'm aware that's just Zeus and Hades, but I think that there's something to be said for the idea that like Hierarch of Hell, or maybe they're a couple. Maybe they're the parents of Monster Slayer, Firebringer, and Bestower of Plenty. Yeah, okay. So, Celestial Sovereign was the mother and was, trapped in this divine status by her children. Hierarch of Hell was the father and was killed and sent down to become the god of hell, to become the ruler of the underworld. And I think that gives us a real, you can imagine that the clerics and paladins of the Hierarch of Hell are a grim bunch. That they are not a lot of fun at parties. Their god was assassinated by the ruling deities. Not the kind of thing that you forgive easily. So we have, and I think, for purposes of our game, I think we want to make this comparatively recent, right? This should be a society that is in transition, not one in which the new regime has consolidated its power, but one in which it is consolidating its power, so that the player characters can wind up like being hired to do jobs by rival clerics from different factions, or gaining the blessing or the enmity of gods on two sides of the conflict, right? What happens to all particularly if all of those clerics and paladins of the King of Heaven became clerics and paladins of the King of Hell, right? If you're playing in a game like 5th edition where the powers that a cleric gets come from like what their god is good at, then it would make a lot of sense that what if your god changes? What if something happens to your god? Okay, great, fine. Okay, so I think we've got something here. I think it says a lot about the society that this pantheon has come from, and there are a few more steps in the pamphlet itself that just mostly not like fully written yet. There are more divine attributes that I could have given. I could have picked more divine archetypes, but I feel like this is enough to be going on with. The core philosophy of the Pamphlet of Pantheons is that I only really need to show sort of what goes above the water on the iceberg. I don't need to, I don't need to detail this entire history. I have inferred the history from what I rolled on these tables. And it just kind of gives me a seed that prevents all of my interpretations from being the same, which I think is the thing that I'm most concerned about as a GM, right? Is that You know, like there are things when you play in a game that I run, there are things that indicate that game is being run by me. You know, any games that I've like when I was doing LARPs and things that co-run with other people, you can always kind of spot like, hey, what's this plot? It's got a bunch of Cold War spy stuff in it. Oh, that'll be a James plot. You know, I mean, everybody's got stuff like that. But yeah, so that's kind of how Pamphlet of Pantheons works to create fantasy religions. I think we got a good one here. And it could have been different if I had picked or rolled randomly. You can also roll them. But I just decided to go with, you know, I had some that I wanted to look at because I wanted to roll on their subtables. I say I'm excited about them like I didn't make them all up. But yeah, there are 16 divine archetypes in total. So this is only half of them. It's actually less than half, obviously, because we got 2 forces of nature. So there's 16 divine archetypes. And then tables for lesser gods, secondary divine attributes, rites and rituals, temples, religious festivals, you know, requirements placed on clerics, structure of the religion, etc. And so hopefully by the end of the process, you have what's essentially a character sheet for your religion. This 2-page or two A5 pages, so basically just one A4 sheet spread that tells you everything you need to know about it at a glance, which is a lot easier than having to read like a whole section of the core book. So yeah, that's the Pamphlet of Pantheons, and I hope that that you all enjoyed taking a look at kind of how this process works. I wish I had a prettier sheet to show you, but I think that this illustrates the process that I hope the Pamphlet of Pantheons will facilitate. So yeah, I think I'm going to call it a day for the stream. But before I go, anyone have any like questions or stuff that they'd like me to answer while I'm here? Again, like I said, there's some lag on this stream, so please be patient with me. But I mean, you know, since we're chatting, does anyone have anything they want to know about the pamphlet? I should have phrased that in a different way because it's just going to result in me like sitting here looking at the chat while nobody says anything, huh? It's a bit of an anticlimactic ending. So while I wait for that, I'll just give the final closing spiel, right? Pamphlet of Pantheons is on Kickstarter until the 25th of February, 2021. It's written by me. It's got a super cool cover illustration by Tim Malloy, and a clever person would have got a copy of it here with him, but in fact, I don't. I just have. I can show you part of it because it's some detail from it there. It's because it's my desktop background. But yeah, Tim Malloy, who did the cover of Knock #1. The God of Bees. Well, I'll tell you what it says about the God of Bees here. Richard asks, no questions. It seems good to me. I want to know more about the God of Bees, though. Well, each of the minor gods has a 1-line description. Which is only about half of what like the full-size gods get. So the minor gods, B says, they do a lot, from delicious honey to honey products. The thing about the God of Bees is like, actually, I say that, but obviously bees play an important role in society. And like, it's just one of those things where like, the thing itself is actually important, but it's also sort of unexciting. So you're the God of bees, you're the God of honey and mead. Like, you have an important role to play in this economy, but you're just kind of boring. Like, that's sort of what a lot of the minor gods are like. Or they're just weird. Like, oh, we have a God of death, and then we also have a God of graveyards. Why not? Or number 9 is the god of knives, not swords, just knives. Main worshippers include cutlers and murderers. So I just wanted to have like little things that, if you played a cleric of the god of bees, you could probably come up with a bunch of stuff, because bees are a strong symbol. In our society, the hardworking bee is sort of it's a hive of activity. It's not something that's totally like a dumb joke, but it's also not something that's like, what do you got a fire? What do you got a bees? So I just kind of put them in there for a goof. So that's the kind of thing that you get among the minor gods. But like I said, like that one line, like the war god, arrayer of armies, like his description is only about 2 or 3 lines long. They all start with a little quote from some kind of like theoretical scripture. So the arrayer of armies quote says, "Let my name be in the bronze voiced trumpet, and let my offerings be made with the sword." And then it just says, war, its virtues and its ills, courage, glory, cruelty, loss, suffering, collective strength, the prop or ruin of the state. And yeah, like that's as much as you're going to get out of arrayer of armies, because the purpose isn't to prescribe a setting; it's to allow you to create different ones. I keep coming back to Glorantha, where if you look at the Lunar Empire, right, it has so many different war gods, but they say something about the different, like the contradictions and conflicts within that setting, right? Whether you worship Yanafal Tarnels or you worship, I don't know, Shargash. You know what? I was going to go the whole stream with that one Glorantha nerd moment, but apparently it was impossible. All right. Anyway, to reiterate, I've got Pamphlet of Pantheons is now on Kickstarter until the 25th of February 2021. You can get it either digitally for a mere £2 or in print for £5 plus shipping. We ship anywhere in the world. Goodness knows how that's going to work out, but we'll figure it out somehow. It's part of Zine Quest 3, and if you have already subscribed, thank you, or pledged. Yeah, if you've already pledged, thank you. If you haven't, please do, and you can find it just by searching for Pamphlet of Pantheons on Kickstarter. All right. I'm going to go and eat my dinner, depending on where you are in the world. Maybe you're going to do the same. But either way, thank you very much for dropping in on my live stream. Or if you're watching this later as a YouTube video, I hope that you enjoyed it. All right. I should have like a thing to end my streams, what you are all free, whatever. But I don't, because I've only ever done this once. But bye, everybody.